What's going on, guys? My name is Jonathan May, and today I'm joined by three wonderful guests. I believe on my left here is Mr. Lucas Bivens.
How's it going?
He's from Mississippi, as well as Mr. James Harrod here. He's a computer engineer and a and a lover of trap music.
Yeah, that's me, man. What's up?
And Mr. Tim Collins. Where are you from, by the way, Tim?
I actually live right up here just north of Dayton, Ohio.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I met Tim on a podcast with another guy that's joined me on my podcast. His name is Jared, and I guess Jared lives in Ohio, right, Tim?
Yep. Jared and I went to high school together, actually. So yeah.
So did you guys go to high school together in Mandeville, Louisiana, or how's Jared connected to Mandeville?
Now, I have no idea. Jared travels all over because he does conventions for the M6P. So he's met comic book people all over. So,
Okay.
So it's entirely possible that that's how he ended up with some of the connections down there. But yeah, he went to high school with me up here in Ohio.
James Harrod. James remembers this time period when I worked in Mandeville. That was in 2012, roundabout.
Oh yeah.
And so at that time, that's when I met Andy Kirby, who knows Jared. And that's how I got hooked up with Jared. But James and I, back in Christmas of 2012, we went to a Christmas party at the company that Andy worked for and that I worked for at the time. And everyone there that night thought we were a gay couple. So,
I mean, what else did you expect, John?
So whenever
John
they said,
"Oh,
"Are you
that's
guys
my work Christmas party?"
Are you guys together?" Me and James just put our arms around each other and be like, "Oh yeah." We did everything.
You better believe it.
So today our topic is the best and worst of the DCEU villains. Just to specify or clarify, this is not going to include Heath Ledger's Joker, which is probably safe to say that that's everyone's favorite, one of their favorite, at least, portrayals of a superhero villain. Today, we're going to discuss the time period from 2013's Man of Steel onward, or at least to modern day, the movies that we have now from the DCEU. Honestly, me personally, when I look at the list of villains they've had from that time period till now, I'm really not that impressed.
Yeah.
But let me ask Mr. Luke, who stands out in your mind as probably the best like DCEU villain that you've seen?
The best. I just was sitting there looking at him earlier, and now I'm losing my mind.
Yeah.
About a week ago, I sat down at work. Well, I had a time, and I wrote down two long lists for both of the topics we're discussing, and someone threw it away, and I haven't had a chance to sit there and do it again.
I don't have to put you on the spot there. If you want to hang back, I can let somebody else go, or I can go.
Yeah, let somebody go so I can find I started making a list earlier and I can't find it now.
So I'll tell you guys my favorite portrayal. I think that the one that stands out in my brain the most, like in the modern DCEU, has got to be General Zod.
I will find him.
Michael Shannon is a phenomenal actor, first of all. And
For sure the best.
Yeah, like the first Zod was so iconic, from that 70s Superman sequel. And somehow, in my opinion, this might be a little controversial, but in my opinion, I think he outdid himself. I think that in some ways he outperformed Terrence Stamp's performance from the 70s. The one that was like, kneel before Zod. I really enjoyed that.
What was the other, the third, was it Non? Was his name Non or something like that?
What, the third Superman movie from the 70s and 80s?
Like it was with General Zod, the other villain.
Oh, you mean
the big guy with the beard who tries to break this?
I don't know what their names were.
What's his name? Nah.
Maybe something like
that.
For
so many years, people told me like, you look like that dude from Superman, the not General Zod, but the other bad guy who like stares at the stick and tries to break it. Like,
I can totally
I was
see
like,
that.
touche. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I do look like that.
What do you think, Mr. Collins? I feel like you probably have something to say here.
Yeah, probably if I had to pick one that wasn't Heath Ledger, and this is kind of an interesting choice, but it's just someone that I always thought did a really good job. Cillian Murphy as the Scarecrow, I thought did a very good job. And really, the reason that's a really interesting choice is he's not even really the main villain in that movie. You know, Ra's al Ghul is the main villain in that movie, but I think he did a fantastic job. The Scarecrow was always one of those villains that never was able to make it to the big screen in any of the previous franchises, and I think that it was kind of a missed opportunity to help resurrect those franchises. They made a lot of bad decisions in those franchises, but ultimately, I think if I had to pick one that was not the Heath Ledger Joker, which I think we all will agree was just an amazing portrayal, I think that's probably who I would pick. I would pick Cillian Murphy as the Scarecrow.
But don't forget, that was before the DCEU was formed. That was like back in the Christopher Nolan days.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
So, okay, gotcha. So you're thinking, okay, gotcha.
Like 2013.
I'm thinking way too early, aren't I? I'm thinking way too early.
We're kind of limiting ourselves a lot.
Yeah, gotcha. Gotcha.
But,
well, I mean, yeah, if I had to pick from that time frame, I mean, Zod does stick out, like you already had said. I think that General Zod does stick out a little bit. Nobody really grabs me as that spectacular villain. I'll tell you who I was not a fan of. I was not a fan of the Jared Leto Joker. That was not one of my favorites. And I know that a lot of people will disagree with that, but that I was not a fan. I think just following Heath Ledger was destined to be one of those things that nobody really thinks is going to be nobody really is going to be able to follow that. So I mean,
it looks like you almost have to try something that extreme different.
Yeah.
To be different from that, and it just.
Yep.
Oops.
So flat.
Yeah.
Yeah. He really, that's the thing. I think he was just like, you know what? I'm going to do something so different that, no one will compare me to not Jared Leto, but Heath Ledger. But what do you think, James? What's your impression of the DCEU as a whole?
Man, as far as villains go, I was kind of like thinking about it and starting to maybe make some notes, and I was just like, we could just skip this one, right? Like, I mean, it's mostly just not good. I think that Zod, I think that's pretty. I agree pretty clearly with you on that. I think he's probably the most, like, the first one I could think about, like, that was good, And even as a movie, it just being a well-rounded film, Man of Steel was really great. I mean, I liked him. I thought it was good. I think he kind of had the whole package as far as the villain goes, not just this cheesy bad guy type feel,
Yeah.
I think, he was good. As far as other good ones, I don't know. It's hard, man. I find any of the ones that I thought did a pretty good job, they had like a major cheese factor to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'll get like a more modern with it. I didn't think that Patrick Wilson, Aquaman, like his villain, I didn't think he was bad. I thought he was pretty good. There's a little bit of cheese factor, but I mean, the whole movie, James Wan doing it. I mean, it was a little bit expected.
I just wanted him to start singing. From being in Phantom of the Opera. Like every time I'm just like, can we turn this into Aquaman the musical? Come on, Patrick, you can do it.
Exactly.
Just go. Let's.
But I did think that overall I mean, in the universe we're talking about, I thought that was pretty solid. Probably one of the better overall villains and performances in the movie for me.
Yeah, it came out recently, and I don't think you've seen it yet, James Herod, but the new Suicide Squad movie, she was also in what?
Okay, go ahead. I was getting messed. I thought you were fixing to take mine. You're not though.
Well, go ahead. No, so talk about what you were talking about.
And I even got tripped up on myself there. I was like, wait a minute, that's not even a movie. The Black Mask.
Okay.
Ewan McGregor's Black Mask. Not a fan of the movie, but
Yeah.
I liked him. Of course,
Yeah.
I love him.
Yeah, I'm
anyhow,
with that.
I really liked him as the villain. I enjoyed his performance.
You're right, because he really made you believe that this guy's a psychopath, even though the movie was complete and utter garbage. He was probably one of the few redeeming things about that film. Like, he really made you think, like, he is off his rocker for real, you know?
He's got some issues.
100%. And Amanda Waller is another good one. I don't know if you guys thought about her or not, but in the new Suicide Squad film, especially, she was in the first Suicide Squad as well. But in the new one, there's a couple parts in that film where you're looking into her eyes and, you know, she's threatening with the button that she presses and it explodes their head. You know, she mercilessly does that in this newer film. I don't want to talk about it too much because I don't think, have you seen that yet, James?
I haven't, man. I want to.
Okay.
I sat down to watch it the other night and it was off streaming. I was like, oh man.
Yeah, I think that's one of those deals where it comes out initially and then it goes off of it for a few weeks or months or whatever, and it'll come back on. It was really good. We really enjoyed that film. But, you know, if you're talking about villains, I mean, you don't have many from the DCEU. I think, James, you guys nailed it on the head. You know, James brought up Ocean Master. I thought, you know, modern day, he's probably one of the more, you know, if you had a top 5, not like his performance is just mind blowing or anything like that, but, and also Amanda Waller, you know, you're Zod, of course, too. You brought up Black Mask. He did a really good job. Ewan McGregor's a great actor. Really good actor.
Yeah.
Yep.
And another good one too that I had written down here was you know, a couple actually. Black Manta was pretty decent, you know, like wasn't like it was anything that just, you know, made me be like, you know, like we're talking about. I mean, this newer generation of DC films is still the biggest problem, and we talk about this on the show a lot, but the biggest problem I think is that they don't really have a clear direction. You know, they always try to change things like mid-plan. So even now, for instance, you know, you kind of already established your Ben Affleck Batman, and you know, you have the other characters that are connected to him in that universe. Well, now Ben Affleck is out. You know, you don't have Ben Affleck playing Batman anymore. So it's just tough to kind of build something when your foundational pieces are starting to crumble, you know?
It's really interesting though, Jonathan, because the really interesting thing is that nobody's bringing up the banner guys, you know, nobody's bringing up Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor, nobody's bringing up Jared Leto as the Joker. If these are the guys that have to be strong if the DCEU is going to have the same gravitas as the MCU, you've got to have that guy. And they just don't have, you know, their villains that are supposed to be the A-list villains have just left a lot to be desired on the big screen.
And I'm sorry, but Jesse Eisenberg was Jared Leto's a great actor. Okay. That was kind of a shocker.
It was a weird role for him.
Yeah. He didn't do as well as I thought he would, even though in my own, you know, like I enjoyed it in some ways. I didn't think it was by any means, you know, the best Joker we've seen, but it was unique and I appreciated what he tried to do. But Jesse Eisenberg was completely the wrong choice for Lex Luthor in so many different ways.
Yeah, not even close.
For sure.
Yeah.
You would have
We've
been
seen so many great portrayals of Lex Luthor that when they finally had this big collaborative movie with the Batman franchise and the Superman franchise, that was the main villain that they decided to go with, and it just left everybody saying, I mean, I think we all left the theater saying, what was that? Because as much as I'm a fan of Jesse Eisenberg, I really do think that he does a lot of very good work. This was just not the role. This was not the role that matched him at all. So, you
know, DC's failures really shine bright on Marvel and how well they do with these decisions and casting and things like that. You know, it really shows you like, dang, they have some people that really know what the heck they're doing, you know, like Kevin Feige and all the people that, you know, I guess the directors they put in place, like the Russo brothers that made the Winter Soldier, the Endgame and Infinity War. Literally before those movies came out, they were known for what's the name of that comedy TV show that's like an HBO show? I feel like you would know it, James. It's got Jason Bateman and it's got the guy that was painted blue that one episode.
Like I know what you're talking about, but I can't remember.
Oh,
Yeah.
Arrested Development.
Arrested
Yes.
Development. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
They were known for that.
Really?
So Marvel's really good at having an eye for those things and seeing into the future almost, but
Well, Marvel has made probably the signature decision that the DC has not made, and that's that you let comic book people do the comic book stuff. And if you let the people who love and know the comic books be in charge of the movies, you'll end up with a great product. When you let the studios dictate what they think the comic book movie should be, that's how we end up with the Joel Schumacher franchise. That's exactly what you end up with. You end up with a lot of overblown and over-exaggerated things and a lot of money poured into a really bad movie. So
You end up with the
that's
first Justice League.
exactly, and that's what we end up with, right? I mean, the studio had so much say in what was going on there that it just completely undercut what any artistic vision from any comic book person would have done. And that's ultimately the decision that Marvel has made, the DC needs to decide to make at one point. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the documentary about Kevin Smith when he tried to do Superman Returns in the 90s. He was pulled on board as one of the lead writers, and that's essentially what it was he says the reason that movie failed is because the studio just tried to take control of everything. They tried to pull the casting, they tried to pull the costumes, they tried to pull the storyline, all this kind of stuff. And he said, this isn't going to be a Superman movie. So they just decided not to do it. That's ultimately the difference between Marvel and DC right now. You got to have comic book people doing the comic book stuff.
Yep. And you can see that now big time. I mean, for instance, okay, you mentioned Justice League earlier. Let's talk about Justice League. Or actually, let's go back a little bit further. Batman versus Superman. To me, that's the one that sticks out the most because you have such a great concept. You literally have the two biggest names in comic book history going to collide. Doesn't take much to sell that fight. Doesn't take much to sell that movie. You have a great story to base it off of. It's Frank Miller, right? Tim Collins?
Yeah.
Frank Miller created it.
I believe it's Frank Miller. Yes.
Yes. And use your source material. I'm not, an expert on that story. I'm not like super familiar with it. I have seen some animated movies that were about like directly based on that source material. I think it was The Dark Knight Returns, if I'm not mistaken. But use that source material. But what did they do instead? Okay, it was almost like, okay, well, that's a really great idea. Let's do Batman versus Superman, but we also need to have Lex Luthor in there. I think us introducing Lex Luthor to audiences in this film is really going to do great, and it's going to build up our universe. Oh, and by the way, let's put Wonder Woman in there too. She really needs to be in it. And hey, you know what? At the last act, we need to have Batman and Superman become friends and fight Doomsday. Oh, and you know what else is a really good idea? Remember in the comics when Superman died and that sold so many copies? We need to put that in the film too. It was like all these different people putting all this different crap in when all they had to do was focus on that one story.
Yeah. That's the main problem with the DCEU right now, and with DC movie franchises in general. And actually, some Marvel franchises have done it too, going back to the Sam Raimi Spider-Man franchise and everything. Is the studio gets nervous that they're only going to have the cast for a limited number of movies, so they think they have to cram it all in. And that's the biggest mistake they can make, is deciding, well, this is going to be our last Spider-Man movie, so we need to have 3 or 4 villains, and we need to have a lot of really big story development with what happens with his relationship with MJ, and we need to have and that's the same kind of thing that has kind of happened, like you said, with Superman and Batman. I mean, they didn't think the long game here. They didn't look at this and say, should we do this for a 10 or 15-year plan like Marvel has kind of laid out? They looked at it and they said, let's go all in on this movie, and then it'll give us directions to branch off of. And it kind of did. I mean, you ended up with the Wonder Woman movie franchise off of this. You ended up with the Aquaman movie franchise coming from the next movie, and all kinds of other stuff happened, but ultimately it just was too busy of a storyline. And when a storyline gets too busy, that's what you end up with. You end up with a franchise that's got to collapse and decide to scrap it and start all over. You got to think the long game in this thing. I mean, the actors are willing to do it now. They didn't used to be. If you used to tell someone you're going to be Batman and you're going to be Batman in movies for 15 years, the actor would have said, no, I don't want to do that. Okay. But now they realize the money involved, they realize that the quality of the movie is actually good, and they'll sign on to do that now. So that's something that the studio kind of needs to get that 1990s mindset out of its head and that early 2000s mindset out of its head and start thinking the long game.
What do you guys think? Do you think that's part of the problem? The early 90s mentality?
Well, I don't have enough. I can't pull from that time. I was way into my 20s before I really started watching a lot of movies from the 90s. Just because the way I was brought up, we didn't, if it was over PG, we didn't watch it,
Really?
So, oh yeah, like Disney movies. Now, come on, I can go way back with them. Okay.
Yeah.
Me and my stepson we watched doing trivia this morning on YouTube for Disney stuff, the songs, and I was like, you can't win. There's no way you can win. Okay. But a lot of I've gone back and watched all the Batman movies, from the 90s and the late 80s, I guess there. It's a different time. I can't really pull back from that time and be like, it's hard to, that 90s mentality you're talking about.
That's interesting, because I've always every movie that people tell me, oh, you've never seen that, you really need to go see that. If it was a movie that came out in the 90s, even for me, it feels dated. It wouldn't be the same as if I had watched it when it came out. So I bet your impression of the Batman movies from the 80s and 90s is a whole lot different than ours, because I grew up.
Oh yeah, cinematic movies. Right.
So that's
right.
really interesting.
I can appreciate some performances, Jack Nicholson and things like that, but it's so hard to watch anything that has special effects. Even just I'm going to try to save the Spider-Man. He brought up the Spider-Man Sam Raimi trilogy. My stepson, I've been binge watching Spider-Man movies because he's never seen them. He's just turned 8, so we're making our way through the Spider-Man movies. And some cringy parts in there, baby.
Forget the fact that everybody at Spider-Man's high school is 40 years old. Other than that, it's pretty realistic, right?
Me and my wife are actually watching those movies right now too. And the first thing that we thought was kind of funny was the second Spider-Man film when he was holding the train. He had his webs holding the train back, and after he finally stops the train, they have to catch him, and they bring him back.
No, he's not.
Yeah, that's it. He's just a kid. This guy's 35 years old.
He's just a 30-year-old kid.
But yeah,
I love that scene though. I love that scene when he's out and they're all crowd surfing over the top. I don't know. I hadn't seen it so many years, but watching it the other day, that scene just feels good. I can't even remember now if it was the music that's helping it or something about, that scene is just powerful. I don't know. It's just them saying, hey, your secret's safe. You saved us. We'll keep it quiet, But man, that scene when he's, on the front there and then gets pulled in is great. That's my favorite of those movies. This too is good.
100%. I don't think anybody's going to argue with you on that. And you're right, Lucas. Another thing, I don't mean for us to start talking about the Spider-Man trilogy, but those films, we've only watched the first 2. We haven't gotten to the third one yet, which is
don't watch it. Just forget about it.
But the second one, man, the acting and the emotion, even from Aunt May, there's some scenes in that movie where she had me about to tear up,
You bet.
And Kirsten Dunst and the little thing that her and Toby had between each other. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, and the director did such a good job of just telling that story, Even with all those characters in there, he still just does a great job. Really,
he did a great job, and I don't blame Sam Raimi for what happened with 3. Once again, this was the studio getting nervous and just pouring everything into the bowl. They said, we got to get all these villains, we got to get all this storyline, we got to get all this stuff because this might be our last Spider-Man movie. And you could tell that's what they did. And Sam Raimi hated it. I know Sam Raimi is not a fan of that movie. He can't be a fan of the movie. It's terrible. That's what you end up with.
Black Spider-Man suit looks amazing.
Yeah, when you get all of the
That's it.
when you get all of them doing it, that's what you end up with is Spider-Man 3. Spider-Man 3 and Batman vs Superman. That's what you end up with.
Yeah, that makes sense, man. That's
No doubt.
Interesting way to think about it. I guess like in my terms with those movies and a lot of the DC universe, you find yourself halfway or 2/3 of the way through the movie and you're like, what's going on? Like we're doing too much here, you know, like, and that's the point. Like it's just overload. Like pick a storyline, stick with it and develop
And then
it.
it's over.
And, yeah. And if it is the last movie, okay, like make it great. Like why make the potentially last thing you do trash? Because you're trying to jam a bunch of garbage into it, you know. I just don't get it, you know. That's a pretty interesting way of looking at it. I hadn't really thought of it as just like, yeah, it's a studio thing, right? It's a Hollywood thing. Like throw everything you can get in there, milk as much as you can out of it. But usually the results lackluster, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we talked about some of our favorite villains from this modern day DCEU. Let's talk a little bit about the ones that stood out in our brains as the ones that were terrible.
We already talked about Eisenberg. Here's number one.
You know, I don't think that
Probably on
Eisenberg.
everybody's list.
Steppenwolf.
Yeah, Steppenwolf. Steppenwolf was a freaking cartoon. Let's just call it what it was. I mean, you know,
Steppenwolf was like a bad drawing of something that would be on the front of a
it was
album.
the worst quality
Isn't
animation in a major film I've ever seen.
Did you guys
Now,
did you guys see the Snyder cut?
Snyder cut, he was a lot better.
He was
looked
better.
For sure. He looked a lot
I would say
better.
better. I
You could
wouldn't say
kinda-
good, but I would say better.
Oh, same. Yeah. But they got more into his story, so you kind of knew what he was trying to do. Instead of the first one, you're just like, huh, who's this guy? And why does he look so dumb?
Yep, it was basically the
It's
complete
not
opposite,
scary.
the complete opposite feeling that you had when you first met Thanos. You know, like when we first met Thanos in Infinity War, we knew crap was about to get real. When we met this guy, just like you said, we were like, oh, this guy's so weird.
Yeah.
This
You
is
got
nuts.
But
the
yeah, I think
worst.
and you
What
know,
are you, a
that's the
deer?
thing. When you look at these villains, they're just so forgettable. You know, you have Incubus from the first Suicide Squad film, the brother of the Enchantress. You know, you remember the Enchantress, right? The she was dancing around and casting spells and everything.
Huh?
So she
Why did
brought
she-
her. Do you
Why
guys
did she have
remember
a
that?
metal? Why did a metal bikini?
I don't
Why did that's what, if you get possessed by something, why would a demon make a bikini on you?
Oh,
You
why
know?
anything about that one?
It was the
Yeah,
worst thing ever.
A lot of odd choices were made for sure.
I think the thing that's so weird is both Superman and Batman have an amazing list of villains that are typical villains that just would have been spectacular to just run through. All around, the villains for those movies have just been a very, very interesting choice. I think, you know, I really think that when we look at some of the more successful superhero franchises recently, I think when we look at the Christopher Nolan series, okay, which I brought up and wasn't supposed to. When you look at the Christopher Nolan series, that's kind of what they did. They handpicked the guys that fit the storyline the best from a plethora of villains that Batman had. And that's it just, once again, it feels like the studio kind of looked and said, we need somebody to combat Thanos. What's somebody that's kind of on that same powerful level, and let's just throw them out there and see if it works. You had like a dozen movies of buildup to get to Thanos. You know what I mean? We didn't just throw him out there, you know, and that's the difference between what a successful studio is doing and what a studio that's trying to keep up.
They made him a big deal through their storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which
Yeah.
is what
When
you're
it's
supposed
finally
to do.
revealed, it's like, oh, this is the big bad boy that's pulling all the strings, you know, like that type of thing. And then you're like, oh, he must be, whether you know anything about him or not, he must be bad news, you know, and that made him a big deal right out of the gate.
Yep. They were sprinkling stuff already in the Guardians of the Galaxy. We got a little sprinkle of Thanos. We even got a sprinkle of Thanos at the end of the first Avengers movie. Like everyone in the theater was like, who is that?
Mm-hmm.
And then we got another sprinkle of him at the end of the second Avengers movie, Age of Ultron. I think I may be mistaken, but I believe that's where he put the gauntlet on and he was like, fine, I'll do it myself. And everybody, still there was a lot of
And
people.
nobody knows if to this day that still doesn't make a lot of sense because Ultron didn't work for him. But okay, it's it was interesting. But yeah,
Well, the whole theme of that movie was I got no strings, like the puppets and blah blah blah. Ultimately, that's another fan theory speculation thing. But people think that Thanos was kind of playing games with Loki. First, he gave Loki the stone and the staff and everything, and the Tesseract, But anyway, ultimately, I hope that DC can turn things around. They've had some good films. The villain part is really hard to nail down. Even the MCU hasn't really just like, they've had a couple. They've had a few that really stood out in my brain. Killmonger, Vulture, played by Michael Keaton. But it's hard to really nail that villain thing. Hopefully they can start doing better. But we are running out of time, guys, for this one. I want to thank you guys for joining me. It's been fun. And everyone else, thank you for joining us as well. Make sure you like the video, subscribe. Check us out on Instagram. We're at Real Comic Book Cinema. You can also look us up on Facebook. Does anybody else, any of you guys have anything you want to plug? Are we good?
No.
I'm good.
Well, thanks for joining me, guys. It's been fun. We love you, Lucas, even though you do look like the guy from Superman 2, the one that burned the stick. All right, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks a lot.
Bye, man.